Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Let me get a sip of water here. We'll get going. And it is a beautiful, beautiful day. It's easy for us to see the goodness when it's a beautiful day, and it's not as easy for us to see it when there are tragedies such as what's going on with the earthquakes in the Pacific Rim. And our compassion and our sympathies, our hearts go out to all the people who are caught up in the immediacy of of the tragedy, of the suffering, of the loss. And we do not wish in any way, shape, or form to seem as if we are uncaring, for that is not true. But what we need to remember is that even in the worst of times, remember Dickens, it's the best of times, it is the worst of times. Even in the worst of times, there is goodness if we will look for it, and if we will find it, and if we will call it forward. And this is why the news media, whenever they're covering tragedies like this, they always try to focus on a bright moment in the midst of the darkness, a hero. They try to find or create heroes that they can put forward, or the dramatic rescue after days of people who are found, and they try to focus on the good to bring our mind back to the good. Now that's kind of a psychological technique that people use. Oftentimes people will tell their children, look for the good in every situation, as a way of getting them to stop dwelling on the problems. And we want to go beyond that today. We want to go beyond that description, which kind of seems, um, Pollyannish, to just, what was it Scarlett O'Hara said in Gone with the Wind? I won't worry about that today. I'll worry about that tomorrow. So sometimes when we talk about seeing the good, people think we're saying, well, you're just sticking your head in the sand and you're turning away, and that's not at all what we want to talk about today. I want to make that clear up front. We are talking about recognizing the good that is there to bring forth more of it. It's amazing if we look back at what to us is ancient wisdom, the writings of scriptures of many different cultures that go back for thousands of years, and how wise, it seems, how wise the people were who wrote these books. I mean, I want you to think in terms of our modern history. If you go back, just a couple hundred years, people didn't know about germs. The surgeons didn't wash their hands before they would operate on somebody. And in their efforts to heal people, they were spreading infection. They were spreading disease. It wasn't until the American Civil War that anything close to modern nursing started to emerge, where they would take the injured people off the battlefield and clean them up. Before that, they left them in their soiled clothes, and their wounds would become infected and they would die. Human consciousness, if we look at it for just a couple hundred years ago, we can look back and kind of say, well, people really didn't know a lot. They didn't seem to know a lot. And then we open a book like the Bible, or we open the Upanishads, or we open the Tao Ching, the Way, and we read something that was written 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago. And it is deep, it is profound. I think it's Emmett Fox who asks us, who could have taught people such as this? Who could have inspired them? Isn't this the goodness of God coming forth in the form of expression, in the form of instruction, in the form of wisdom, and in showing us all a better way? And if we look back to the beginnings of the Jewish Bible, which now people in our culture call the Bible, the Old Testament, if we look back at the book of Genesis was not necessarily the first book written. It's very interesting. It's the first book in order today, the way the things have been assembled today. We kind of take this library of books and we start with Genesis and we end with Revelation. And, those are kind of the bookends of everything in between. But they weren't always assembled that way. They weren't necessarily written that way. It kind of evolved over time that they were put in this order. And of course, the book of Genesis deals with creation. Where did we come from? One of the key questions of all human races, where did we come from? Every culture has a creation myth, a story that contains their deep values of where they came from. It's not uncommon for people who translate the native peoples of the world as they study them, and they find out what they call themselves. What do you call yourself? Like we call ourselves Americans here in the United States. But before we had these artificial lines on the earth to set up countries, what did people call themselves? And in many cases, they called themselves the original human beings, the original people. Each culture felt that it was the original culture. They were the true people, the original people that the Great Spirit created, God created. However they would think of it, their concept of the deity. So every culture has a creation myth. Every culture has a myth about where fire came from, where food and water came from, and they all have a flood myth. There's certain themes that go through human consciousness that keep expressing themselves. And the book of Genesis is the creation story for the people who wrote it and for the people for whom it was written. But it wasn't necessarily the first chronologically book that was written. The first book that was written, some scholars believe, was the book of Job. And the book of Job, if you look at it, it deals with the problem of pain and suffering, right? The problem of evil, as theologians call it. If God is so good, well, why is there sickness? Why is there death? Why are there earthquakes and tornadoes and floods and all of these things? And that is another one of the primary issues that each culture, each philosophy, each theology has to deal with. So it seems logical to me that in developing a religious concept of God, of the universe, of life, that people might find an entry point or a starting point of wondering, well, why are we suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? As Rabbi Kushner titled his book, which is to my understanding, his interpretation of the book of Job. But the book of Genesis was written later, and the book of Genesis dealt with the origin of things. How did things begin? And it's very interesting in there because we are told that as God was creating, as God was bringing all of the universe as we see it, and as the things that we can't see, but bringing into existence all of these things, God looked upon his creation, or her creation, or its creation. God looked upon God's creation and declared it to be good. It is good. Now, I remember being a student in high school, and we had several courses in religion on the Bible. And the teacher who was instructing us at the time took the creation story in the book of Genesis, and he likened it to somebody sitting on a beach before sunrise. That if you looked at the stages of creation, in the beginning there was the light, and you could see the light, but you can't see the sun. And if you read Genesis, the sun comes on the third or fourth day, but the light comes in the beginning. So it's kind of like, the sky gets light, and then as the sky gets light, you start to see that there's air and that there's earth, and then you start to see that the earth really consists of water and earth and land, and then you start to see the birds come into the sky, and That's the way that my teacher was explaining it. And of course, as a young man in high school, I accepted that. Well, that's reasonable. It seems to make sense. But of course, motivation as a teenager in high school was just simply to remember what it is that they wanted me to remember, so I could pass the test and then get out of there. Everything at that stage of life was, let's get this over with so we can move on to something else. But as I grew older and as I started to study more and more about religion, religious ideas, about the religions of different cultures and of different worlds, and as Ralph Waldo Trine said, there's a silver thread that runs through all of them, and if you can find that silver thread, it appears everywhere, and you're starting to find probably as close as we can say as truth, because it appears in so many places. It's expressed in many different ways. It is expressed as is appropriate for that culture. But people are trying to say the same thing in different ways. And I started to understand Scripture at a different level, rather than taking it as being kind of a literal historical text, or as being simply, poetry that somebody sitting on a beach several thousand years ago wrote down, and it somehow touches people and they say, oh yes, that's it. Started to see it having a deeper meaning for me, a deeper meaning of the spiritual interpretation or the metaphysical interpretation. In the beginning there was nothing, there was void, there was darkness. And the Spirit of God spoke, and the Spirit moved upon the waters. And that's how creation came to be. It was an act of intention by a divine mind, an act of intention. It's telling us that the invisible stuff and substance of the universe. I love Dr. Holmes. He's a very plain man. He spoke in simple terms. He said the stuff of the universe. He didn't get any more complicated than that. The stuff of the universe. The stuff of the universe comes into time and space. It comes into a particular form at a particular time for a particular purpose. And after a while, it gives up that form. It gives up that space. It moves on to a different purpose, to be reformed again in a different way, At the scale of cosmology, you can kind of see that with the black holes in the universe, We have invisible energy becomes matter. Einstein, of course, gave us his famous formula for that. And then that matter goes back into the black holes over billions of years, and it goes back into invisible energy. And then that energy goes somewhere and is reformed again into matter. So we can kind of see, if we will tune into it, if we will give our attention to it, we can kind of see that what we are being told in the Scripture can have a different meaning. Or Emmett Fox says, it's like digging for diamonds in the clay in South Africa. And people dug down and they found more diamonds than they had ever found before, and they thought, wow, this is it. It can't get any better than this. But after a while, they dug down further and they hit a different level of clay, a different color of soil, and there they found even more diamonds than they found at the first. And the Scriptures seem to work that way, that we can get one meaning out of them. We can say, oh, this is literally true. This is how it came to be. God spoke, and there was, and on the first day was this, and there was that, and there was the other. We can look at it intellectually, and we can say, oh, but it's poetry, and it's a metaphor, and somebody is trying to encapsulate their feeling, and they were inspired by a sunrise on a beach. Or we can take it metaphysically. We can say that it's teaching us a deeper spiritual truth. It is teaching us that our experience begins first in consciousness. Our experience begins with what we see, the vision that we have, what we see. And something acts upon that, something that we call the law of mind, something acts upon that and arranges and brings into existence the invisible stuff of the universe into whatever form is appropriate to give expression to that which we have first believed in our heart, we have first seen, we have had vision. So we are told in this very scripture, we are told that when God created, God looked upon creation and saw that it was good. Saw that it was good. And I think it is most important for us to remember that. God saw that it was good. Now there's all kinds of explanations that people come up with for this, and they say, well, yeah, but that was before humanity fell and everything was good, but later on sin entered the picture and things weren't so good, and then, God sent the flood to wipe out that which wasn't good and all these things. But we have to look back and say, if we're talking about omniscience, we're talking about that which knows everything, and that which is timeless, which has no beginning and no middle and no end. And it would see everything. It would see everything. It would know everything. And this is another problem for theologians. If God is so good, how could God create human beings knowing that God would have to condemn them to hell? Basically condemn part of itself to hell. Is that possible? There's another problem that theologians wrestle with. So we're told that when God looked upon creation, God saw the good. And then 2,000 years later or so, maybe more, Jesus comes along and he tells people, he says, judge not by appearances. Judge not by appearances, but judge by the righteous judgment. And the way that I interpret that is he's telling us, don't get caught up in the appearances. And the appearances, for the most part, that we as human beings have in our culture is the appearances are what is bad, what is wrong, what is broken. We get caught up in that drama. I think, in my mind, I think the first human addiction is drama. We understand substance. People get addicted to substance, and we can understand that. We can kind of say, well, it's a habit-forming substance, and they crave it. But I think that there's even a deeper addiction, and it's an addiction to drama. Our whole society in the world seems to be addicted to drama. We want to see the strife. We want to see the crisis. We want to feel the struggle. I know I've told you this before, but it illustrates the point. Lori and I went one time to a writers gathering in Wrightsville Beach. One of our ladies in church wanted to go. She wanted to write, and she read in the paper there that there was this meeting in Wrightsville Beach, and this man who had been an editor of some famous magazine, Time or Newsweek or something of that nature, World News Report. He retired at Wrightsville Beach, and he met in a coffee shop every week with a group of people who wanted to write. And this lady asked us if we would go with her kind of as moral support, so she would have somebody there that she knew, and we went. And it was, maybe 5 or 6 people who had been in this group, and they had been given an assignment to go home and write something and then come back and share it with the group. And one young lady started to read what she had written, and it was very much like a diary or a journal, I was born, a long time ago in a faraway place, and I grew up and I went to this school and I went to that school, and it was kind of going along that lines of narrative. And the man interrupted her and he said, where's the drama? What is the crisis? Where is the struggle in your story? You have to get that out in the very beginning in order to hook your reader. They have to see, they have to be able to relate to this crisis that you're dealing with, to this struggle, or they'll lose interest. and they'll move on to something else. And at the time he said it, I sat back and I said, my goodness, no wonder we get what we get in the news, because if the attitude is that if you don't hook people into the drama at the very beginning, they're going to change the channel, they're going to tune you out, then that's what people are going to give us. That's what the people who produce the news and the movies and everything else are going to give us. And this is nothing new, by the way. Aristotle wrote 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, he wrote Poetics, and he was kind of analyzing drama. And if you look at any drama, if you look at a movie, within about the first 10 minutes of the movie, what you'll find is what the protagonist, what the main character in the movie, what it is that they want, and then something happens that takes them away from that. And then they spend the entire rest of the movie trying to get back to it, moving from one crisis to another crisis to another crisis, until the crisis is so big that you think there's absolutely no way that they can possibly get out of this situation. And then the movie ends by either they get out of it or they don't get out of it, one or the other. There's only two possibilities at that point. And then the last 10 minutes of the movie is spent wrapping up and telling us what happened and closing all of the loose ends of the movie. So there's something in the human psyche. There's something in the human psyche that seems to be addicted to that drama. We want to talk about the bad. We want to get engaged with what is wrong. It's almost as if you can figure out what's wrong with something, you're smarter than it is, and smarter than the people who are doing it. And listen to the conversation, in the break rooms and in the gyms and wherever people hang out. Listen to what they're talking about. And usually they start a conversation with complaining about something that's wrong. Oh, this politician doesn't know this, and that politician doesn't know that, and they just kind of tearing things down, kind of bringing them down. So we have to understand that in the human psyche, in the human nature, there seems to be this desire or this need, I don't know what you would call it, but certainly this character trait, excuse me, that we tend to focus on what is wrong. We tend to focus on what is bad. We tend to focus on the ain't it awfuls. Oh, ain't it awful, ain't it awful. And in fact, that's what we get most of the time on the evening news. Adam Curtis is a documentary filmmaker from England who did some pretty extensive documentaries on the media and the way that the media plays into our desire for drama. And he says there used to be a time when the news told us something, analyzed something for us, helped us to understand something. Now they just show us stories, and all we can do is say, oh, ain't it awful. Oh, ain't it awful. And of course they do that, and then watch, the very last story every night on the news is an upbeat story. Something good happens somewhere. They want to leave us. They bring us down, they bring us down, they bring us down, and then they lift us up, and they let us go into the next program, whatever the next program on their network happens to be. But God tells us, or the Bible tells us, that when God looked, God saw that it was good. And Jesus tells us to judge not by appearances. And this is very important to us, and we need to kind of think about it, and we need to be willing to analyze ourselves and our own thoughts. I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you, take you to computer programming for just a moment. I've been around computers for a long time, since before they had hard drives or silicon chips for memory. That's how long I've been working on computers. And in the very beginning of the internet, before the internet became what it is today, when people were trying to figure out what to do with it and write web pages, they actually had to be programmed. You had to go in a programming language, HTML programming language, and you had to literally program everything that was going to appear on the web page. You had to go into code, and you had to tell the program where to place that object. So if you wanted a picture of the ocean, for example, in the top right-hand corner of the web page, you had to define the image. You had to tell the program where it was going to find that image. and then you had to tell it, now move it over and place it, 400 pixels to the right and so many pixels down, and you had to really go in and define where it was going to be on that page. And then later on, Microsoft came out with a program that made it easier for folks. And it contained a feature that they called WYSIWYG, WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And that made it easier because you could just drag and drop your picture and put it where you wanted it to be. If the picture was too large, you could grab the corner and make it smaller, or you could drag it and make it bigger. You could manipulate, things as you saw them. And when you were finished and you told the program to save your work, the program figured out all of those things that we used to have to do manually. It figured out how to tell it how to store the information. It said this image is going to be in the top right-hand corner. What you see is what you get. And I remember when it came out, I was starting to study in earnest. I was starting to study religious science, and I thought, wow, that's more profound than I think they know. What you see is what you get. See, life is a business. Raymond Charles Barker said this: life is the process of now becoming the future through our thoughts and our beliefs. And what you see is what you get, because what you see is a reflection of what you expect. What you see is a reflection of what you believe. Many times people will say, well, that's the way it is. That's just the way life is. Take a look at it. This is the way life is. And what they're really saying is this is what I see, and it must be as I see it. There's no other possibility other than the way that I see it. And that's not true. It's not true. There's so much going on in this world. There's so much going on in our environment right now that we can't take it all in. We take in a selected slice of it, a selected piece of it, and we see what we expect to see to a great degree. If something doesn't match our expectations, we kind of look past it. It's there, but we look past it. And you may remember, I'm pretty sure it was an Oprah experiment where during the middle of the show they had someone dressed as a thug run up on, a robber run up onto the stage and rob somebody's purse. A street criminal, a purse snatcher is the word I'm looking for. A purse snatcher. Someone was dressed as a purse snatcher, and they run up on the stage and they grab a purse and they run away. And then afterwards, they asked the studio audience to describe this person. And the descriptions ranged all over the place, from short to tall, from wearing a leather coat to wearing no coat. The race of the person was different. Everybody saw a different person. They saw what they expected to see. See, people have a built-in prejudice of what purse snatchers look like. And that's what they saw. And now, after all these years of us growing up watching Perry Mason on TV, and the eyewitness was always the one who put the bad guy in jail, now they're coming out and saying, well, eyewitness accounts are, mostly just about 40% accurate. Because even though people were there and even though they saw what they wanted to see. They saw what they expected to see. So what you see is what you get is more profound than I'm sure the Microsoft designers ever realized, because what you see is giving you important feedback. What you see is telling you what you are believing in your heart, and there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, and that's what we get. So this concept then of see only the good wherever you go. It is not a concept of sticking your head in the sand and pretending that tragedy doesn't exist. It means that since the divine has created everything, that even where the appearance of evil might be, right? Evil not being a reality or a person or a persona like the devil, but evil being those things that are in opposition to life. Ernest Holmes tells us, if you want to know if the thing you want to do is something you want to do, ask yourself, does it give a greater expression to life, to love, to truth, to beauty? And if you can answer yes to any of those and go on to the next set of questions, was, does it try to rob anything from anyone, or does it try to harm another in any way? And if the thing that you want to do gives a greater expression to life, to love, to truth, or to beauty, and it doesn't rob or harm anyone in any way, then do it, because all of life is for you. And we can turn that around and we can say, if the thing that we want to do does not give a greater expression, it gives a lesser expression to life, love, truth, or beauty, and it does harm or harm someone or rob something from them, then we can say it's evil. It's against life, right? It's against life. It is live turned backwards. It is evil. So if we pay attention to what we see, we can identify that which we are attuned to consciously and mentally. And we can ask ourselves, are we seeing the good? Because the good must be there somewhere. The good must be in the midst of this appearance somewhere. There has to be good. It's like the old joke about the psychologist that put the two boys in a room, and the room was just full of horse manure. And the one boy said, this is terrible. This stinks. This is lousy. What are you doing this to me for? And the other one says, yippee, there's a pony in here somewhere. The good is in there somewhere, but I'm not talking about pretending. I'm not talking about ignoring. I'm talking about being aware of what we resonate with and ask ourselves, is it the good? So let me give you an example. We know that in a divine mind that everything that the divine creates is perfect. We know that the bodies that we use while we are here on earth are perfect creations of God. We know that in the divine mind, sin, sickness, and death cannot exist. Right? Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us to get over the fact that we believe in sin, sickness, and death, because God doesn't believe in any of these things. God only sees its creation as good. So we know then that disease is not something that is sent to us from God. We know that it is not a thing that has a power to perpetuate itself. Right? Matter does not have the power to perpetuate itself. But disease is only existing as an appearance where the perfect health has been blocked in some way, right? Dis-ease means lack of ease. The normal natural state is health. And where the normal natural state of health has been blocked in some way, then the disease appears. So we can look at this, and we can look even in the midst of disease, we can look and we can say, where is the good? And we say the good is the health. We know that the health is not showing up here because there's a blockage. That is all that is happening. It is not a punishment from God. It is none of those things. It is simply something that is blocking the perfect health. And because we have tuned into that, because we have become aware of that, because that has struck a chord in us some way, we can say, well, what this is doing is this is inviting me to reaffirm my belief in perfect health. It is inviting me to stop declaring the power of disease. And it is inviting me to instead turn my mind entirely to God. As Emmett Fox tells us, turn away from the problem, turn to God, and to recognize that God is the source of life. God is the source of health. And that is what I wish to believe in. That is where I wish to put my attention. We see many hospitals springing up in the country. I remember when I was a child, when I was growing up, and many of you are about the same age as I am, that childhood leukemia was a death sentence. If you know any children in your neighborhood or your family who about that time in the early 50s or so, if the child came down with leukemia, it was, they would die. They would live for a few years, maybe it'd be 4 or 5 years old, and then they were gone. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking, to see these little ones, who had an entire future, an entire life ahead of them, to be struck down by disease. But there's something in the human psyche that knows that was not right. That was not the way that it ought to be. That it was not the way that it should be. That there had to be a way to combat this. And we started to see these research hospitals like St. Jude's popping up. And then we saw the dramatic improvements that they made. And what I'm getting at is they were built on a foundation, on a concept that they didn't have to accept the bad. They didn't have to accept the evil. They didn't have to accept the sickness or the disease. But they knew that the good and the health had to be in there somewhere. And there had to be a way to bring it out. Now, at the beginning, of course, you know, if we look back at this, the mindset of human nature is let's fight this thing. Let's fight it. Let's get in there. Let's combat it. Let's struggle with it. Let's find a way to kill it and all those kind of things. And there was progress. I mean, there was certainly progress along those lines. But now, and maybe it's because of me and where I am in my life, but now I'm starting to see more and more stories about how science and doctors are finding ways to work with our own immune system. In other words, to find the health that is there in our bodies and to stimulate it into a greater expression so the body's normal, natural defenses are able to assist in demonstrating the health that is our natural state, that is our natural being. So we want to understand then that when we're being told to see only the good, it is an opportunity for us to become aware of where we may be getting caught up in the human drama of lack, of limitation, of evil, of disease, and where we are buying into those things, you know. And to ask ourselves, is that what I want to get? Is that what I want to experience? Do I want to get caught up in the drama of lack? Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us an affirmation to consider is there's no mixture of evil in my idea of good. There's no mixture of lack in my idea of abundance. So we look at the financial situation of the world and we can get caught up in the, oh my goodness, ain't it awful? And, you know, there's poverty, and there is. People are having the experience of poverty. We would not deny that. There's greed, and yes, there is. But you know what? There's abundance. The life that has created us out of itself is more abundant than anything that we can ever imagine. So we can believe in the lack and limitation, or we can believe in the abundance of God that is finding its way right now to make its appearance in the life of each and every one. And we can, in effect, we can call that forward. For lack of a better way to put it, we can call it forward because what you pay attention to is what you get. What you see is what you get. So if we focus on the lack in the world, we create more lack. If we focus on the abundance in the world, we create more abundance. And it's a matter of where do you want to put your time and energy? Where do you want to do your work? So a couple of ideas on how to do that. First, intention. You have to set your intention, right? Life is a matter of intention and attention. Is it your intention today? Is it your intention every day that you get out of bed? Is it your intention to see a little bit more of God, a little bit more good than you saw yesterday? You remember I told you Thomas Troward wrote a letter to his son who was going off to the trenches of World War I and told him to try to see a little bit more of God every day. In the midst of combat, in the midst of trench warfare, in the midst of World War I, he's telling this young man, try to see a little bit more of God every day. Viktor Frankl, in his incredible work, Man's Search for Meaning, talks about in the horrors of concentration camps, of being happy, that they could take everything away from him. They took his family away from him. They killed them. They took his clothes away from him. They took his profession away from him. They took everything away from him. And he said the one thing they could not take was his ability to be happy, to control his mind. They couldn't force him to hate. So what is our intention? Is it our intention every day, in spite the appearances of the world, in spite what is being told to us by the news media, in spite of everything else, is it our intention to experience more of God today than it was yesterday? To see more of the good today than we saw yesterday? And then where is our attention? Where is our attention? Can we be aware of what it is that we are actually seeing? Right? And this is where meditation comes in as a most important spiritual practice. Because our minds tend to wander, right? They fly, they flit from mountaintop to mountaintop. The little grasshopper mind hops from here to here. The butterfly mind alights and moves and alights and moves. But think about the importance here. It is done unto you according to your belief, and if 1 minute you're believing this, and the next minute you're believing that, and the third minute you're believing something entirely different, what are you going to get? What you see is what you get. What are you going to get? So we have to learn the discipline. We have to learn to keep bringing our mind back where we want it. Most of the time we start to learn how to meditate, and it's a very simple meditation. Breathe in and count 1. Breathe out. Breathe in and count 2. Breathe out. Go from 1 to 5. And go back to 1. And do that for 20 minutes without losing count. And what we very often find when we start is that we can't even get to 5. We get up to 3 and our mind goes off about a problem we have at work, or something we need to do with the car, or something somebody said. And we completely forget that all we were doing was counting from 1 to 5. But to bring our mind gently back and say, oh, I was counting. Start again at 1. And in this way, we train our minds, we teach our minds to stay one place, and we catch ourselves when we are drifting away. Right? We become aware of the fact that we are drifting away. So what we want to do is create that awareness in everyday life. What am I thinking about now? What am I engaged in now? If I'm sitting around the break room and people are talking about how terrible the economy is my head nodding yes? Oh, it's awful, you know. And the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And as Don Miguel Ruiz says, that which we don't say no to, we have agreed with. I'm not saying you need to stand up and tell your coworkers that they're all wrong. What I'm saying is you need to say to yourself, that's not my truth. That is not my truth. I'm not buying into that. I'm not buying into the race consciousness. Today I see only the good. And the good is that God is the source, the substance, and supply of the entire planet, and has enough and plenty for each and every one of its creation. And if there's any apparent lack or limitation, it is because there is a block in consciousness somewhere. And I'm not going to participate in that block. I am not going to contribute to it. I am not going to make it bigger. But I'm going to let it dissolve into the nothingness from which it came, by knowing the truth, by seeing only the good. So you must have your intention, and you must pay attention to what you are thinking, right? You know, it's one thing to get up in the morning and say a beautiful prayer about how wonderful life is and how wonderful everybody in the world is and how beautiful things are, and then get in our car and be faced with the harsh reality of people cutting one another off and blowing their horns. And then we get to work and we have all of these demands that are placed upon us and all of the ego nonsense that plays out in a corporate environment. And it's very easy for us to forget that beautiful prayer that we started our day with, you know. But right there in the midst of that seeming chaos, right there in the midst of that confusion, we are being called to ourselves. We have called ourselves to be the light. Let everybody else do what they want to do. We don't need to tell them off or tell them anything. But what we need to do is gently bring our mind back. So we're not counting from 1 to 5 during the day, but what we are doing is bringing our mind back to seeing only the good. So we find ourselves getting caught up in the drama, and this person or that is a real pain in the butt, and all these kind of things. You're going to say, nope, nope, nope. I see only the good. That is the presence of God expressing themselves as that person, and that good is in there. And I know that it's in there. And I choose to see that and relate to that and not get caught up in the drama, not get caught up in the appearances. One of the best ways that we can do this is love. Love, right? Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us when our heart is so full of love, we can't see the evil. We can't see the appearances otherwise. So can we fill our hearts with love, the experience of oneness? Can we recognize that we are all some part of God's creation? Can we see each other as God sees us? We have to start by seeing ourselves as God sees us, and for many people that's the challenge. Can we look in the mirror and see the love of God looking back? Can we look into the eyes of another and see the love of God looking back? Can we look at the person who we might be afraid of, who we think is trying to do us harm, and can we see the love of God looking back? Can we see past the appearances? Can we see the righteous judgment that God is all there is and God is good? And the next technique that I'll give you, the next spiritual practice that I'll give you, so we have intention, attention, love, and gratitude. Gratitude. In all things give thanks. In all things give thanks. In the things that the world calls good, give thanks. In the things that the world calls evil, give thanks. Give thanks. Dr. Holmes says that if you're with someone who is sick, as long as there is 1 ounce of life in that body, all of the goodness of God is there. And that which the sickness appears to be can dissolve in a moment. In all things give thanks. Find the good in everyone and in everything and praise it, celebrate it, bless it. And by blessing I mean acknowledging the presence of God. We really, really, really have to come back to this mystical experience, this feeling of unity, this dependence upon God for everything. You and I don't know how to make our heart beat. We don't know how to take the air and extract oxygen and put carbon dioxide back into it. We don't know how to make water, It's all already been provided for us. We have to tune into it. We have to accept it. We have to participate in creation. Can we express gratitude every minute of the day if possible, in everyone we meet if possible? Even the people who annoy us, can we express gratitude? In Buddhism, they tell you if somebody annoys you, thank them, because they have revealed to you, they have let you see something within yourself that you are ready to let go of. What you see is what you get. If you don't like what you see, you need to change what you think. You need to change what you believe. So the person who annoys you is revealing that to you. It may help to think that at some level you have hired this person to come into your life to upset you so that you could become aware of it. I don't know that you did, but it helps to think that way. Because then what happens is we stop thinking of ourselves as a victim. We start thinking of ourselves as the only one who has the power to change. Who's going to change your mind for you? Your spouse, your boss, your teacher, your clergyman? Who's going to change your mind for you? Nobody. Nobody can change your mind for you but you. And you can't do that while you're thinking of yourself as a victim. You have to stop and say, oh, that upset me. And then distance yourself from it and say, no, I am the one who is observing, the one who is being upset. What idea would change that experience from being upset to seeing the good? What idea? Can we look at it and say, this is an opportunity for me to change? That's good. If you become aware of sickness, this is an opportunity for me to get in touch with health. That's good. If you become aware of lack of resources, this is an opportunity for me to get in touch with the abundance of God. That's good. Find the good. Find the good everywhere you go. Give gratitude for it. So this idea then, this ancient idea of seeing everything as good is more than just an optimistic outlook on life. It is more than just a way of not worrying about it today, but worrying about it tomorrow. And of course, tomorrow never came for Scarlett, and it never comes for us. But it is a way of us becoming aware of what we truly believe in our subconscious mind, in our heart. And it is a way of us having an opportunity to change that until we do see only the good. So we fill our hearts with love for ourselves, for our God, for our kinsmen, for our countrymen, and eventually for the whole world. And then beyond, whatever is beyond. We fill our hearts with love. I'm not going to fight with you. I'm going to love you. I'm not going to be afraid of you. I'm going to love you. That kind of thing. And we fill our hearts with gratitude. So through intention, through attention, through love, and through gratitude, we can transcend the drama of the human experience. It's only a drama. It's only a stage show. It's only a play. It's only a movie. It's not real. It's not real. What is real is that God looks upon its creation and declares it to be good. And who are we to say it is not? So I invite you this week, starting with the mirror, I invite you this week to recognize everyone and everything you see as good. And if you can't, if you are caught up in the drama, try to find what might be good about it. What might it be calling you? What might it be pointing out to your attention? What might it be making you aware of? An idea that it is time for you to let go of. You are the only one in your universe, the only thinker in your universe. You are the only one who can change what you think. In order to do so, you must be aware of what you think. You must pay attention. So even that which annoys you can be good. I invite you to make it your conscious purpose this week to become aware of everything that you see, everything that you experience, and to transcend every and anything that you might consider to be less than good. You are the very goodness of God on this earth. You are here to call forth that goodness in yourself and in others. And you can't do that when you're not seeing it, because what you see is what you get. So see only the good. And so it is.